There are movies that promise you one very specific thing. There are movies that can do that in the title. Godzilla vs. Kong, by golly, I don't think there is any criticism that says it does not deliver Godzilla vs. Kong.
These Monsterverse movies, as they call them, are all about some sort of degree of marquee value, or what we call a high concept film. You know, if you have a movie called Godzilla King of the Monsters, you're thinking, all right, Godzilla's going to throw down with a whole array of monsters. And you would be correct. But here, the concept is so simple and so self-explanatory that they had a solid template laid out for them to begin with.
Now, the question we have to ask ourselves is there more to Godzilla vs. Kong than just Godzilla vs. Kong? Greetings, loyal listeners and new recruits. I'm Drew Deitch.
I'm Travis Newton.
And this is GenreVision.
GenreVision is a weekly movie club where we discuss horror films, action movies, fantasy flicks, sci-fi cinema, and more.
And we are kicking off another theme month. This theme is Fighting Fools. We're doing a whole bunch of, I guess you just call it fight movies. And the reason we're kicking it off is because we have a versus movie, a new release movie out this month, Godzilla vs. Kong, a movie that we actually asked you, loyal listeners, if you wanted us to review. You said yes, and here we are. Godzilla vs. Kong, the culmination of what is dubbed the Monsterverse, in this modern American take on what started with Godzilla and then brought in Kong. We will say, since this is a new release movie, we will be avoiding spoilers to a certain point where we will tell you, hey, this is the spoiler wall, and we'll let you know when that comes up. So our broad thoughts, Godzilla vs. Kong is a great example of a marquee value movie where if you were going to the movie theater, which, you know, you used to, and apparently people are for this movie, there was a time when you would go and you would just look at titles with pretty much no context as to what they were.
Right. This is the birth of the high concept film. High concept film is a film where you could look at the title on the marquee and pretty much know what you were getting.
Well, it's why there's always a debate about titles. You know, like we were just talking about this before we started recording. The movie Edge of Tomorrow. Edge of Tomorrow doesn't tell you anything about the movie unless you have some inclination about what the movie is about. But you look at a movie like Godzilla vs. Kong, it's right there. You can't escape what you're being promised in the very title. Whereas if you see something, you know, that's like unforgivable or, you know, detached or snapped, it's like that could be anything.
Right. You'd have to look at the poster to figure out like what the tone was and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
But with Godzilla vs. Kong, it's promising the marquee value of you're coming here to see two known characters duke it out. And I'll say this for Godzilla vs. Kong. If that is all you want out of this movie, you will get it, and I think you will get it delivered in a way that is going to be quite enjoyable for most audiences.
Right. You know, one of the things I often hear is sort of a mistake in film criticism is that people think high concept means lofty. This is the opposite of a lofty film. It's extraordinarily high concept because you can sum up the premise and the general sort of tone in the film in Godzilla vs. Kong. It's simple, you know, monolithic, you know, sort of, you know that, okay, two titans are going to go head to head and it's going to be a big, you know, contemporary blockbuster event. And if you're looking for the movie to deliver on those things, I think, yeah, it does deliver on those things. And it delivers on them in the comfort of your own home. If you're in the US, you can watch it on HBO Max, which Drew and I did.
Which we support doing.
Correct. So how it delivers on that is well, that's where the primary discussion lies here, because this is directed by a person who I thought was maybe not suited for this job initially. It's Adam Wingard, and Adam Wingard directed great movies like The Guest. I also believe he did You're Next, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
He did the Death Note movie for Netflix, and like You're Next, a lot of people really like You're Next. I felt like I kind of didn't get it or wasn't in on the joke. I think The Guest is incredible. And then Death Note, you know, has its moments, and you know, one of the things that like really you know, is like a running theme for Wingard is he's incredible at picking needle drops. And that continues in Godzilla versus Kong. You know, as a matter of fact, one of the first great things that we hear in Godzilla versus Kong, and one of the things that really helps establish Kong as I think the de facto protagonist of the movie, is a fantastic needle drop.
Sure. And I think we'll get into more of those specific elements when we get past the spoiler wall, because we will talk about, first of all, go listen to our Freddy versus Jason versus Alien versus Predator episode, where I believe we talked about, with these versus movies, one party is always going to be kind of positioned as the protagonist, or if not the protagonist, the more sympathetic of the two.
The underdog.
Yeah. If not the underdog, at least the one that the audience gets more of a emotional connection to. That's certainly, I believe, Kong in this instance. I don't think that's a big spoiler.
No, he's more human. He can emote more easily just because of his facial anatomy and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it was no surprise to me that they would choose him or position him in the screenplay as the underdog.
Sure. You talk about Adam Wingard. When we were watching this, I was like, this is kind of like a rung or two above MCU direction for me, which means it will be very functional and accessible to the majority of people. Wingard at least has interests in more dynamic lighting and contrast in color than an MCU movie or product normally does. So I can't call it a good looking movie, and I think we'll get into that, but I don't think it's a bad looking movie. I think it's got some sense of character in it. I mean, it's very fun to see him bring over his very 80s, and this is very fantasized 80s neon tinge to scenes. You know, if a scene's going to be red, it's going to be red. If a scene's going to be green, it's going to be green. Like,
sure.
I prefer that to the, kind of granite slate, just easy, cool colors that a lot of modern blockbusters do.
Yeah, a lot of them have like really lifted blacks where everything just kind of appears low contrast and like stainless steel colored. It's very gray. This takes a different approach, but it takes I think a better approach to that than Godzilla King of the Monsters. Godzilla King of the Monsters used several different highly monochromatic color schemes based on like which character was receiving the focus and the prominence in the particular scene. You know, Godzilla was like cyan blue, Rodan stuff was like lava orange, and they kind of traded off on using different colors. Ghidorah's stuff was lightning yellow, and it sort of like bled over the whole scene. And I ultimately felt like that last movie was really ugly, and it was one of the biggest problems I had was like, this looks like shit, and then everything is so big in terms of scale that it's a cartoon that doesn't seem to mean anything, and it didn't seem to work with the tone. I think Godzilla vs. Kong is a vast improvement in a lot of regards, even though it's Wingard, using every scene as an excuse to be like, well, I love neons and I like this aesthetic and I'm going to overdo it. And I think if there's one place to overdo it, it's here. It's okay. It's fully indulging in that pastiche.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. I do think this isn't a spoilery discussion point, but I think it's one we need to address early. Doing these movies as modern blockbusters means that this is all CG, mo-capped, if that, sometimes completely animated. And I love old school kaiju movies. I love that kind of stuff. And part of the reason I love it is because it is people in suits, it's sets, it's things like that. There is a real tactile feel to everything. As much as I have enjoyed some of these modern Monsterverse movies, I'm not getting the same experience as I do with classic kaiju movies because these are cartoons. Like they're highly attempted, high attempts at realism with them, but they are animations. And there's a certain ceiling for me that can be reached with doing these things where it's like, oh, I can enjoy the coolness of it to a degree, but it's a ceiling. It's a ceiling that comparatively to the movies that, these are now a part of the legacy of, that comparable ceiling is much higher. Like I love that kind of stuff. So I don't think a lot of people will care about that particularly, but it's an issue for me. And I think it's partially an issue for you, but there's also another compounded issue, I think, for you with these kinds of movies.
Yeah. I mean, I have some bias against kaiju films just because they're just not a particular thing that I really enjoy. I didn't really grow up watching them, didn't have anybody in my family that said, "Here, kid, you'll love this," and give me the right movie at the right time, for that seed to be planted. It never blossomed. There are certain kaiju movies I like, but they got a really difficult fight with me because I'm just not really all that into kaiju films. So, bias acknowledged. I think this one, did a decent job of delivering what it set out to do, even for somebody like me who went in a little bit more skeptical. But, returning to your talk about the whole cartoonery of it, I really bristle against the way this film and the prior film shows scale, where it's like, this is all a big cartoon. The scale ceases to mean anything. The creatures, they don't have to look real, because when I really litigate that idea of like, how realistic should a kaiju movie be? The answer is always, well, not very, right? Like, who wants a super hyper realistic kaiju movie? I'm sure plenty of people out there say they do.
Gareth Edwards, apparently.
Right. And I think for some reason his approach, it's not necessarily about the realism, but it's more of like choice of angles and choice of perspective.
But that plays into realism.
It certainly does, but also that movie's weird.
I'm on your side with Gareth Edwards. Because when I first saw, this is why I didn't want to get into this tangent, but we're here. When I first saw the Gareth Edwards Godzilla, I didn't really like it. I was like, oh, okay. It was on the second viewing where I was like, now I know what this is. I really like that movie. And part of it is something that we often butt up against, which is realism. He is going for, with his camera choices and perspective choices and tonal choices, he's going for something that feels like, what would it really feel like to be in a Godzilla movie? And that, I think the way he pulled it off was very interesting, but it was clearly not what a lot of people wanted out of a modern Godzilla kaiju movie.
Sure. It was also not properly sold by the studios, because one of the primary complaints I hear about that movie is it wasn't what I wanted. It wasn't what I thought that the trailers were going to get me. Like, it didn't deliver on marquee value. And that's a problem. It's going to cause I think a lack of enjoyment for a lot of people, but there is plenty about that Gareth Edwards Godzilla movie that really sticks with me. And most of it is choices about how sequences are staged, how sequences are shot, sound design, score, like all that kind of technique stuff really gets me going with that movie. The characters, they kind of suck. Whereas like Godzilla King of the Monsters was like, okay, let's go full monster mash, fuck realism. It's going to be super, super colorful. We're going to go back to the old, original Japanese themes. We're going to use the fucking Blue Oyster Cult song. And it was like all about excess. The problem I have with it was like, well, all of this like visually just means nothing to me. Like all of this scale is so ridiculously huge. All of these structures and interiors are like green screen fakery. I'm like, this doesn't feel like anything to me. I don't sense any drama. It's like none of these elements are actually sticking together enough to actually like create a scene that has a tone and a goal dramatically. It didn't seem like I was watching much of anything. It was really boring. I
mean, I can't speak. I bailed on that movie. I disliked my early experience with it so much that I was like, yeah, like nothing is clicking with me. Because this is a tired thing to say, and I actually think Godzilla vs. Kong improves on this, is that with these movies, it's like, oh, you don't need to care about the characters and stuff. And I'm like, I understand that argument to a degree. I don't think it's a blanket excuse to totally dismiss that, because there are Godzilla movies where I've enjoyed storylines with the human characters, but I wasn't feeling that in King of the Monsters. Godzilla vs. Kong does have at least one, I think, solid, simple, but that's okay because it's Godzilla vs. Kong. It doesn't need to be super complex. Human storyline and relationship that I think works, which is the younger kid in the movie.
Yeah, there's this young kid in the movie who I believe is deaf. The young actress comes from an all deaf family, and so she's fluent in American Sign Language, which is one of the reasons she was cast. Her character is adopted by a scientist character played by Rebecca Hall in the film, and their interactions and the number of scenes that they're given together, just signing back and forth. It's like, I like this. This really works, actually. And Alexander Skarsgård's character, who plays kind of like the bland, actiony white guy scientist,
as we call them, the bland Danny.
Yeah, he's a bland Danny. He's a fine compliment to them, and he shares a lot of scenes with them, and it's like, okay, he's giving this material his all, and it's coming across as very sincere. And so I feel like that's a step above the humans, and sometimes even a step above in like Gareth Edwards' Godzilla, which were even more bland. I remember Aaron Taylor Johnson's character feeling like a total nobody in that movie.
Yeah, Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch had nothing going on in that.
Yeah, they didn't have shit going on. But I think the key here was acknowledging that having some like slightly better than garbage human characters in this movie wasn't quite enough. Like, we actually had to care about the title characters. We had to actually care about at least one of them. And the way that they do that for Kong is, I think, really efficiently done and quite well done.
I agree. We can get into specifics potentially when we get past the spoiler wall, but I totally agree. I think Kong is a protagonist, works in this.
He's sympathetic. I like him.
I think obviously a lot of people are going to, it's a movie that's built around bringing preconceived notions into it. I mean, that's the whole, it's like, are you team Godzilla or are you team Kong? Like, and I speak to that. It's like, yeah, I love Godzilla, so I can come in and it's like, I don't need to be sold on liking Godzilla. I liked him when I walked in. And that's something that this movie is banking on, I think, a lot. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but thankfully they at least knew, which is the Versus formula. It seems like one of these characters needs to be given proper protagonist exploration. And they did it with Kong and they did a good job. But without getting into specifics yet, Godzilla versus Kong, it's exactly what you expect it to be, which I think will actually, again, make it very enjoyable for a lot of people. But it's not much more than that, up to a point. The pacing of the movie has clearly been manufactured to be as breakneck as possible to get to what people paid to see.
Yeah, that first act is super fast, but what I liked about it is it didn't feel like it was racing along at a speed that was too fast or like jittery. It just was establishing things in the most efficient way it could while making sure that there were still like moments happening. Dialogue scenes were lasting a length of time that felt correct to be there and no longer.
Yeah, but it's so much. I mean, like the entire introductory scene with Skarsgård's character, it's just all exposition for the most part. Like so much, and that's what a lot of human characters in these types of movies just end up being. They are exposition cannons, and that's okay.
Particularly when there are like big concepts that people have to explain. Like this movie adopts a brand new concept that hadn't been introduced in any of the previous films, and it's a wackadoo concept.
Yeah, we won't say. I think it's a little bit of a spoiler, but
yeah.
No, I think the pacing benefits it in terms of getting you to what you want to see, which are the big monster fights and everything. But it's also like it is slimmed the movie down so much that it's like, oh, okay, this is all it wants to be.
Mm.
I'm like of two minds of it. I appreciate its very clear and motivated focus, but at the same time, it means that aside from the scenes with Rebecca Hall and the little girl, there's like nothing else going on beyond the marquee of the movie.
Yeah, they bring back Kyle Chandler and Stranger Things girl, Millie Bobby Brown. They bring back their characters for this movie from King of the Monsters, and they could be anybody, honestly. It really doesn't, have a big effect in the movie. They're kind of smaller players.
The only reason it's there is because, and I'm saying this as somebody who didn't finish King of the Monsters, is that Millie Bobby Brown has a vested interest in believing that Godzilla is a good being, that what he's doing is...
You mean her character? For a second there, I was like, he's talking about Millie Bobby Brown believing in Godzilla.
No,
sorry.
Yeah, whatever who cares what her character's name is? Like, it's maybe starts with an M. I don't know. That's how little this character matters. But that's the thing, is because she's the one that's like, Godzilla must be doing this for a reason, because he's apparently he saved her, I guess. I don't know.
She says so.
Sure. And well, that's all it needs to buy into. And that's why they have to bring her back, because she's another exposition, fuse essentially that's lit, which is like, well, why is Godzilla acting this way? Well, let's follow her.
Right. And then Brian Tyree Henry plays a podcaster that gets sucked up into her plot. And then also the kid from Hunt for the Wilder People, Julian Dennison, is tied in. He plays Millie Bobby Brown's character's friend.
Yeah, he does. That's there. Like that's, I mean, I sound very dismissive, and we're going to get into spoilers in just a second so I can be more specific about it. Godzilla versus Kong, if that's what you want, that's what you're going to get. And I think it's going to deliver in a way that will be pleasing, but that's about it. And I just don't have much else to say beyond the movie's desire to deliver that. And we can talk about the effectiveness of how it delivers that when we get into more spoilery discussions. But other than that, I mean, there's other little stuff here that I think we can check off that's not spoilery. The score to this movie is pretty bad.
Yeah, it's a Junkie XL, aka Tom Holkenborg score. And most of his movie scores really rub me the wrong way. Like all the stuff he did for Batman versus Superman and the Snyder version of Justice League. It's like all that stuff just... I'm like, no, this is not good. This does not sound good. I think the only score that people really love that he's done is Mad Max Fury Road, which admittedly has some very good music in it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my main thing is that it just all bleeds together, and he's taking the classic, I can't remember if I think it's Ifukube or Ikufube. I think it might be Ikufube theme of Godzilla, which is one of the greatest monster themes ever.
I don't know if he's actually quoting the theme directly or if they've just moved notes around enough to not give credit to the original.
Well, it is enough of the dun 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 dun. Like,
yeah,
it's like 4 notes that he has weaved in to sound. It's like it echoes the theme. It's not a direct riff on it.
Yeah, whereas like in the last movie, they had Bear McCreary like really play those, really do like new cues entirely based on the original score for Ye Olde Gojira, dun 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 dun.
Yeah,
all that.
That's the theme, but in the beginning of that theme, there are those like 4 just dun 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 dun.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
And that's what Junkie XL like riffs on for his Godzilla music, and it's just not very good. Like it's just very bland, big, booming blockbuster fare that doesn't really sing through. Like if I didn't know that was part of the Godzilla theme, it would be a nothing element at all. Like it doesn't stick out other than that.
And most, if not all of what he does is all digital. And it's not right. To say that it sounds like a synth, but it's like fake orchestra, which just rubs me the wrong way, but that's because I'm a bit of a snob.
Well, but beyond that, as far as more non-spoilery stuff, we definitely got to talk about your, I think, biggest cinematographical issue, which was not the biggest issue for me, but I certainly took notice of it, which is close-ups.
Yeah, this is a super nitpicky complaint that I don't think a lot of people are going to agree with, or maybe it isn't even a problem that they perceived. Too many goddamn close-ups in this movie, man. I had a similar problem with that last big Star Wars movie, the episode
Rise
9.
of Skywalker.
Yeah. It was like
the last big Star Wars. What was that? Was that one the one with the lasers?
Sorry, I kept wanting to call it Revenge of something or other, but anyway, it's like in interiors primarily, it's like you need to pull back a little bit, because like almost every single close-up of this movie was a really tight extreme close-up of like just the actor's face and then a really blurred out background, like really shallow depth of field on them, longer lens, compress everything. I'm like, not every shot needs to be that. You need to like back up, give us a sense of the space. Like if you're gonna go to fucking Hawaii to shoot in jungle locations, make use of the location. Don't make it look like a green screen anywhere. Because when you just put a face in front of a blurred background, that's a Zoom call. Like give me a little bit more in terms of like conversation. There's a scene between Brian Tyree Henry and Millie Bobby Brown and Julian Dennison's characters in a Chinese restaurant, which of course is lit in like pure purples and magentas. It's a fun look. Again, like the neon is just overdone, but if you're going to overdo it, here's your perfect opportunity to do so.
I think it was all red, if I remember correctly.
It's pretty purple and pink, but anyway, anywho. It's just one tight close up after another tight close up after another tight close up after another tight close up. It's like, God damn, like I know you're not shooting coverage here. I know you're carefully choosing your shots. Maybe not all close ups next time. It's just, give me a medium shot every once in a while. Give me a nice 2-shot. Just, vary it up a little bit.
I will say that, I think that's particularly in the human dialogue scenes. When we get to all the big previs CG stuff, I'll say that there's some cool. I really liked Godzilla's intro in this. I don't think this is a spoiler, in which the totally, limitless camera is able to swoop around his big scales as he's swimming in the water, and it swoops back around, and we can see that his eyes are glowing blue underneath the water as he's starting to rise, and then he rises up, and it's he gets a big close up.
And I'm not into that kind of stuff. I'm really much more on the side of like, I think with characters and places this big, like locations and monsters of this scale, the limitless camera doesn't do a good job of actually portraying that scale at all. Because so much of the impressiveness of scale comes from like us viewing them as human beings, low angles, actual regard for like how much space something is taking up. And it's, that is my big reason, like probably my favorite thing about that Gareth Edwards movie, but here I understand that they wanted to take a different approach. Like there are some shots here, I think, that do a good job of portraying the scale, but otherwise it's all like, this is just a big cartoon and we're going to put the camera anywhere we want because it's fun.
Well, I think that also keys into what you said about your bias against kaiju stuff in general, where it's like, it's not really like the Gareth Edwards movie is an anomaly in that regard.
Totally.
Like to the legacy of it. Cause it's like, these movies have never really been interested in presenting scale. Like even when they weren't cartoons, like when they were people in suits, it's like, no, like that pagoda is not really that big, but who cares? We want to see Godzilla smash it over.
Right.
Like, so I can understand how that factors into that. But
it's not like they're going to put a ton of care into building all of those miniature buildings when they're going to get one take for those monster actors to come on the soundstage and smash the fuck out of them. You know what I mean? You're not going to reset and okay, let's bring in all the new buildings that everybody, did painstaking miniature work on. No, that's not how those old kaiju movies worked because they just shoot them quickly and cheaply on sound stages.
Well, again, I like to your note about scale is I certainly limitless camera and CG stuff amplifies that issue, but I think it's just a fundamental part of the subgenre for you where it's like, and certainly there are movies that have attempted, different angles as far as how they want to treat scale and stuff. But I just don't think it's as, again, I think those are more anomalies than they are the law of the land with these kinds of movies.
Yeah. And another side effect of having characters, monsters that are so huge is that you have to put them in spaces that are essentially just wide open or flat. So the ocean, a big empty room, like nothing around, a huge long ship with like nothing on deck. It's so uninteresting. I think visually, when you look at an apartment set in a movie, if they're not trying to make a point that the apartment is empty, otherwise like things, the set is dressed, it's full of stuff to look at because otherwise the emptiness kind of seems unnatural and unpleasant to the eye. And nature abhors a vacuum, and I just sense a vacuum and all this is just this big vacuous emptiness that I hate.
I think we can switch over to the spoiler wall here so we can get into more specifics because, well, I think we can go ahead and hop over the spoiler wall now. So we'll get into more specifics because there were things that I certainly enjoyed about Godzilla versus Kong. The fights that they had, they essentially fight. What is it about? It's technically like 3 times, but really it's 2. And then there's a fight that they team up with.
Yeah. There's one on the ocean. There's the big brawl in Hong Kong, and then there's because
the big brawl in Hong Kong, there's an ending to that fight where Alexander Skarsgård's like, round 2 goes to Kong,
right?
And it's like, well, but the fight's not really over, and then it continues, and then Godzilla wins. So the first fight, which is on these big battleships and in the middle of the ocean and stuff, there's some interesting angles, and you're gonna have your fun stuff like, look, Godzilla's gonna shoot his breath away. It's action figure blocking, which I understand is what people are going to want from these things, and I get it, but it's whatever. Like it was fine. My favorite shot in that actually wasn't a fighting shot. It was a shot from, and this is to your point about human perspectives and stuff, is a fighter pilot who is launching off the deck of an aircraft carrier, and as he shoots off, you can see the camera is facing the fighter pilot in the cockpit, and you can see Kong behind him on the ship, and as he shoots off, Kong growls and gets smaller, and it's like, oh, that was really cool.
Yeah, it's a real short shot, but it makes an impression. And then I actually really loved the choreography and the staging of the Hong Kong fight for the most part. I feel like buildings really lend things, a proper sense of scale. I felt like, this isn't just a big empty void where these characters are fighting. Like, this is like, and it's not just about the destruction. It's like, oh, this is like a proper playground for this to actually happen. There are things in the frame. Kong climbs buildings and leaps off of them. His big fantasy axe, whack, sticks into buildings and stuff like that. It's like, fuck physics. We're just trying to have fun. And I appreciated that. And I felt that, that marquee value was really being delivered upon in the Hong Kong fight sequences.
Yeah, it's certainly the highlight of the movie. I mean, Godzilla and Kong have that aircraft, fleet fight essentially. But there's a big, like the wacky thing that Travis was alluding to is that in this, there is the Hollow Earth, where there is basically a prehistoric weird alien plane that exists in the middle of the earth. And that's where all the Titans come from, apparently.
Yeah, there are like 2 horizons and gravity is all fucked up. It's very confusing to watch. It doesn't make a whole lot of visual sense, but it does produce one interesting moment where Kong floats from one horizon to another, and in between there's like this, I don't know, it almost looks like an asteroid belt. It's like a layer of floating rocks that he pushes through, and his hand reaches out towards this big monkey paw shaped rock and things like that. I'm like, oh, okay, this is getting a little bit a little bit weird. I thought that was cool. And I like the score during that scene.
These kaiju movies are, as a legacy, they're weird movies. Like, they're about giant, like the progenitor of them, Godzilla, is also an anomaly in the entire genre. Like, because what they eventually became was very different from what they originated from.
Sure. It's like Friday the 13th. Totally different.
Sure. Not so different. Friday the 13th was just a big, rip off of Halloween, but like, we're going to sell it on the kills.
But it was a whodunit.
That's all that became.
It was a whodunit.
Well, one of the worst whodunits ever made.
Kill her, mommy. Kill her.
How's it a whodunit for a character that you never meet until the end? Anyways, all the weird, like there's like a snake dragon bat thing that Kong fights in the holler. It's like, okay, that was cool. There's little stuff like that, but people care about Godzilla versus Kong. So let's talk about that. And primarily it will be the Hong Kong fight. Cause yes, I think that's manufactured to be the highlight of the movie. And it mostly is. There's plenty of fun stuff going on. There is a point where Godzilla smiles and laughs after doing some smackdown on Kong. I'm going to be honest with you all right now. My feelings on Godzilla versus Kong, I'm just going to spoil you right here. It's about 3 stars. Like I had a fine time. Godzilla smiling and laughing after beating up King Kong, 1,000,000 stars.
Yeah, this is Drew's catnip. Like there has never been a moment in any other kaiju film that I feel like has been so targeted at Drew's joy buzzer.
Well, it's just a big thing, and Wingard has talked about this, is that for a majority of modern Godzilla stuff, Toho, the originators of this character, do not like Godzilla to emote because they have a viewpoint of that Godzilla is supposed to be approached as a godlike being, something that is beyond human comprehension and does not, equate itself to the emotions of humans. I also think this is because there is a sense of shame from the Showa era in which Godzilla would do happy dances and give thumbs up and, be goofy. And they were like, he emoted too much. Now we want to if we're going to take Godzilla serious, he's got to be a serious, he is just a creature.
I mean, it turns out there's a whole bunch of people who like those Showa movies though. So
exactly. And I'm one of them. And so a little moment of Godzilla laughing and smiling, kind of breaks that rule. And Wingard has talked about, like, I kind of broke that rule. And it's one of the best moments in the movie because it's like, oh yeah, Godzilla has emotion. Like, he's a character. He's not just a big cool, but like a big nothing action figure monster.
Yeah, there is a moment at the end of the original King Kong versus Godzilla where they sort of tumble off a cliff and into the sea. And that's just like the end of the movie. It's like, what kind of resolution did we achieve? Like, what happened here? And at the end of this movie, Godzilla walks off into the ocean. However, there is a moment where they're allowed to, the two big monsters are allowed to have a moment where they acknowledge each other. We understand that there's an emotional transference and, something going on. There's a spark of humanity here that we're supposed to understand. Like, this one character is acknowledging this other character and, not resolving this grudge. This is, saying like, and it's not over, but all right.
We cool.
For the moment, we cool.
I love the moment in which in this movie, there is a definitive winner. Godzilla beats Kong.
He does, yeah. In that 3-round fight in Hong Kong, Kong gets his ass whipped. He wins the second round quite handily, but
Godzilla comes back hard after that. And
he does.
That sequence,
Godzilla's the winner. Yeah.
Well, in that sequence in which he is clawing up Kong's chest, it's like it's to your point where it's like this is working on selling Kong as the underdog, and in this point, the loser. And in this sequence, they have a little, a ridiculous roar off as Kong is down on the ground and Godzilla's putting his fucking giant foot into his chest and just rah. And then when it's done, there's a big close up on Godzilla and his nostrils flares like yeah, I won. Fuck you. Like, and it's hey, it's really fun being able to create these like giant characters that emote, particularly for Godzilla, who does not have the, he's got a human enough face and that, his eyes are in the right spot and everything like that. But
he's anthropomorphic enough, but I feel like they did a decent job of, allowing him to have those moments of expressiveness and, in the animation. I think it's well done enough. He's not some giant mindless weapon, or mindless source of destruction. Here he has a very clear motivation. His initial motivation is to wreck shit because Apex Cybernetics has built Mechagodzilla out of one of the remaining brains of Ghidorah from the last film. And I got to tell you, one of my favorite things here, I know Adam Wingard likes Evangelion, which is cool with me because I like Evangelion. And Mechagodzilla is initially controlled by a character with the last name Serizawa, who we'd never met before, who might be related to Dr. Serizawa from the last two movies. I don't know. He essentially becomes a remote mecha pilot or an EVA pilot by sitting in the giant skull of the deceased Ghidorah and, like jacking in with like Tron headgear and shit like that. It's honestly really cool. Like a great set. Yeah,
this is where the weirdness of this genre of movies is at its best, is where it's like, oh yeah, we can have a thing where part of the plot is that a character is piloting a robot giant inside of the skull of another dead giant. And the way that it's working is that is psionically linking with its brain to the robot. It's like, oh, give it to me. Like, give me that. That is my kind of silly. And I think it's an element of the silliness that has made these kinds of movies have such lasting powers. It's like, we get it. Like, it's very quickly explained through expository lines of dialogue by Brian Tyree Henry and stuff. It's like, oh, psionic stuff, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, fine. I don't even need the explanation. It's just fun and cool. And I got to say, of all the kaijus in this, Mechagodzilla comes out looking the dopest.
Yeah, Mechagodzilla has a really interesting and a surprising design. The design of it was actually kind of surprising to me. He's a little bit leaner. I love the spines. It's a cool looking thing. I like his laser blast breath. 7-year-old me would have really wanted this action figure.
He's very Evangelion meets Terminator.
Sure.
And I think that's a very unique design approach to Mechagodzilla. I like that it's like, okay, he's the villain. And of course, it's going to turn out that, well, Godzilla and Kong have to team up to beat the real bad guy, which is Mechagodzilla, which of course, since it's technically Ghidorah, like is since it's its brain, once they get the magic MacGuffin power source from Hollow Earth and they're able to synthesize it to power Mechagodzilla properly, then the link is severed and it's just, Ghidorah's brain is able to pilot Mechagodzilla independently of the actual human pilot. Yep.
And so Ghidorah's rampaging through Hong Kong again, and our two fighting fools team up to stop him. And the death of Mechagodzilla is spectacularly wet. Lots of like fluid, hydraulic fluid spraying everywhere in a very bloody fashion.
PG-13 violent.
Yeah, and it's a fun moment, and the movie delivers in the fun in those final scenes. And I don't give a shit what happens to any of the humans after that, because the movie has done what it set out to do. There is no mid-credits or post-credits sequence. It's fucking over. And be sure to check out, which songs they used in the credits, and that's about it. It's a really good makeup and vanity set song in the movie.
Versus writing wise, I think this is smart in that there is a definitive winner between Godzilla versus Kong. Godzilla beats Kong, but then Godzilla gets his ass whooped by Mechagodzilla, and it's only because of Kong that they're able to defeat Mechagodzilla. Godzilla has to power up Kong's axe, which is made from like the scale of an ancient Godzilla.
Sure.
And so Godzilla has to power it up with his atomic breath, and then Kong can just tear ass. And Kong is the only one who totally destroys Mechagodzilla. So the versus writing thing is like, okay, cool. Godzilla beat Kong, but Kong beat Mechagodzilla, who beat Godzilla. So they're like on an even playing field now.
Right. There's kind of a transactional feeling to that. Like, who beats whom. Yeah.
Like, it's smart because if Godzilla just beat Kong and that was it, there would be dissension in the ranks. They have to think about these things when they make these types of movies.
Right. There's something that has to feel fair about it. And there also has to be a sense of resolution.
Right. And the resolution being that Kong was able to beat Mechagodzilla. So Godzilla and him have this understanding of like, all right, we square, like
apes together strong.
Right. And then Godzilla walks off, and then Kong gets to chill out in Hollow Earth, and that's his new home, and he listens to the air I breathe, and that's it. And and like I say, Godzilla versus Kong, I had a fine time with it. I wasn't like perturbed, or I can't even say I was necessarily bored.
No, it's fine. It moves along at a decent pace, and I never felt let down or bored in any kind of moment, from the pacing or, from especially bad writing. My main problems with it were visual, which, I'll talk about again here once we get to the shelf.
I know people probably will want more after this, but I like that this is an ending because I mean, one, I like that things can end, and two, it feels right. It's like, this is what these were building up to anyways. And I as much as I really like the modern design of Godzilla in these movies, there's just not much else that I think they're doing for me as somebody who loves kaiju movies that interests me.
Right. At this point, they'd just be, much like Godzilla versus Kong was, remakes of prior ideas, but done with a modern spin. And that modern spin, I think, doesn't really have a whole lot of draw for you or me.
No, I mean, after watching it, other than the movie I'm going to talk about when we hop over to the shelf here in a second, it just makes me want to go back and watch older, Showa era movie and the Heisei era, which is my favorite era in the 90s. It just makes me want that because it's like, that's giving me what I want out of these types of movies. This, as good as it may be, it's still just, I won't say that I was bored with it, but I did feel disconnected at times. in that when it is just the big cartoon slugfestery in that battleship sequence or that kind of stuff, just it doesn't scratch that itch. And that's a specific thing to me. That's not the movie's fault. That's something that I think, again, a lot of people will enjoy about it. But Godzilla vs. Kong, it was good.
Totally fine. Not a waste of your time, but it's not going to blow your mind either.
No. So I do think we can head over to the shelf where we pick a movie that might act as a good pairing or substitute for our main topic. And we encourage you, loyal listener, to go to GenreVision.com and comment on the post for this episode with your own shelf pick, and we will feature it on next week's episode. Travis, what are you going to pull off the shelf for Godzilla vs. Kong?
This is going to be, I think, a fairly expected pick, but I really like the movie Pacific Rim. Primarily, the reason I'm putting it here is for cinematographic reasons. You have an approach that says every single camera angle needs to be something achievable in a real setup, whether it be mounting a camera on a helicopter or putting the camera down on the deck of the ship, or, having some sort of touch to the camera, whether it be adding camera shake or having artificial water land on the lens of the camera. These are things that people don't necessarily notice as they're watching the film, but it's something they will feel. It'll be a subconscious thing that adds up. Also, the movie has a much taller aspect ratio. It's in 16:9 widescreen, I believe, which is good for taller creatures, and it allows you to put them closer together in the frame and sort of more densely pack the frame with stuff instead of having to spread it out across the wide aspect ratio, or have a lot of empty space. So I think the way that the kaiju are seen in that movie through either the eyes of the characters or in angles specifically chosen by Del Toro creates a really, really different feel. The Hong Kong sequence in Godzilla vs. Kong has such a similar look to the Hong Kong sequence in Pacific Rim with the big flying kaiju, but a totally different approach to how they're done cinematographically. And again, both of these have a really, really fun tone, but what they don't have is interesting characters. Characters you can really engage with. All the characters have sort of a flat affect, and the kaiju themselves in Pacific Rim are just kind of like living bombs or missiles. Like, they don't really have a whole lot of personality. They're monsters that are like mean and they smash stuff, and that's pretty much it. They don't really have a whole lot of sense of character to them. But they're incredibly designed. The design of them is absolutely beautiful. So it's a much different approach, and a result that is in many surface ways very, very similar, but there are plenty of differences to count. Important differences, I think. What are you pulling off the shelf, sir?
Well, we didn't mention this in the spoiler section, so this might be a little bit of a spoiler if you want to fast forward a couple seconds. In Godzilla vs. Kong, the little girl in Godzilla vs. Kong, her name's Gia. She's played by Kaylee Hoddle, I believe is her last name. And she's deaf and she does sign language. And spoiler for just a second, it turns out that she and Kong have communicated through sign language. It immediately made me think of another film which closes out a science fiction franchise and also focuses on sign language. This is War for the Planet of the Apes, which is not even my favorite of that trilogy, but it seems the most thematically appropriate to compare or pair with Godzilla vs. Kong. War for the Planet of the Apes is the second in the trilogy, directed by Matt Reeves. It's even, from my memory, darker and kind of more dour than Dawn of the Planet of the Apes.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's they have crucified apes in this movie. It's really gnarly.
Yeah, there's a ape prison and all this kind of stuff. My favorite one of the series is the first one, Rise.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah. I skipped it in theaters. I heard nothing about it. And then eventually it started to be, people were like, this is really good. And I saw it and it blew me away. I was so just awestruck by that movie.
Again, really good focus on making the apes the heroes of the story, and really the protagonists, and them coming across as, the kinds of protagonists, even though they weren't human, that you could hang an entire movie on, and a fairly serious one at that. You know, that moment when Caesar says no never ceases to make my hair
chills down. I didn't know it was happening, but that entire stretch where they're at the ape reserve prison place, and when he first comes in and he meets Maurice and Maurice starts signing to him, I was like, I was just like, oh my gosh, like I'm getting like goosebumps just thinking about it right now. That entire section of Rise is just, it's so good to me. But War for the Planet of Apes is also very good. It's just a very strong, dark culmination of what that trilogy was doing. I think it's a phenomenal trilogy, and I kind of can't believe it got made. It could only have been made by, pre-Disney Fox, because they own the rights to it. But I just want to kind of reaffirm that trilogy is very good and that people should continue to revisit it. And I'm not exactly, at this point stoked for whenever Disney decides to figure out what they want to do with Planet of the Apes. Hopefully it'll be good, but it's got a lot to live up to after those movies. But now let's head over to the listener shelf picks. Now let's head over to the listener shelf picks for last week's episode on Tammy and the T-Rex. Eric Fuchs went with The Toxic Avenger. Mr. Milksteak had Frankenhooker, Wes Craven's Deadly Friend, BB, and a Three's Company episode, A Friend in Need. JT went with Carnosaur, and Stephen Esbella went with Child's Play. Awesome shelf picks, everybody. Thanks. We love seeing these every week and look forward to the ones for this week's episode. Now, we are going to do some calls to action real quick, but please stick around because we're going to talk about some currently consuming in a little bit, where I believe Travis has some podcasts lined up, and I'm revisiting at this point, what I believe is considered a classic video game. So stick around and we'll talk about that in just a second. So as always, we want to let you know we've done a pre-show episode for this over at our Patreon at patreon.com/GenreVision. And this was a very unique one because if you become a subscriber to our Patreon, this pre-show is actually a live exercise in us figuring out next month's movies. And we did it. We have an entire slate of movies next month, and you will hear it happen live on that pre-show. If you become a Patreon subscriber for just $5 a month, you'll get access to all of the bonus material we do, which are weekly pre-shows for every episode. We do extended currently consumings every month, and some other bonus material for GenreVision and our other GenreVision shows, FinFlix and Third Time's the Charm. So if you want to check out some more additional GenreVision stuff, go to patreon.com/GenreVision and become a premium subscriber for just $5 a month. And the final thing for calls to action, reviews. And, I know we beat this drum every week, but in all honesty, there's a reason we've been beating it every week.
Yep. The reviews on the Apple Podcast Store are one of the things that help us climb the charts and increase visibility for the show. And there is a chance, if we get enough visibility on the podcast store, then the show could go some really, really fun places. It could wind up on the recommended pages there and get a lot more ears listening to the show. And that's definitely something we would want and look forward to. So all you got to do is get on your Mac, your PC, or your iOS device and head to the Apple Podcast Store, search for GenreVision, and you can leave a rating and a review there. If you do so, we'll make sure to read it on the next episode of GenreVision.
Let's do some currently consuming.
Nom, 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 nom.
Travis, what's been on your plate?
We just did a big currently consuming for the end of March. That's over on our Patreon page. But I didn't get a whole lot of chance to watch movies and other stuff in the meantime. What I have been doing though is listening to some podcasts. There's a new one called Bad Vibes. It is a horror anthology show. There's just one episode of it out there now. It is an audio drama that is hosted by one of my favorite podcasters, a guy named Justin McElroy. He plays a character who introduces the segments, and he's kind of a crypt keeper type character. There's a segment at the beginning of this first episode where he's introduced, and it's very, very fun to listen to. Really brilliant use of stereo mix and the sound effects and things like that. Fun vocal effects, and the story is pretty darn good too. and that's called Bad Vibes. You can find it wherever you find GenreVision. So check that out. And then the other podcast I listen to is a very popular podcast. It's called Song Exploder. They've also turned it into a Netflix series. And on every single episode of Song Exploder, the host of the show, Rishikesh Hirway, interviews the artist, producer about the particular song in question, and they break down the production of, like, you know, here's what the inspiration for the song was, here's how we recorded it, this is the strange effect we put on here, and lots of audio and musical geekery. It's right up my alley, but it's, you know, it's a popular show for a good reason. It's just damn good, and the quality of the interviews they get is always awesome. They got a couple up there with Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails, and a really broad selection of genres as well. So Song Exploder, it's probably something you'll like if you like music. And that's all I got.
Well, on my end, I am in the midst of replaying BioShock. I got the trilogy collection remaster thing that they did. And because I've been thinking about it for a while now, I was like, yeah, I want to play through those games again. And I'm enjoying my time with it. I'm at the point which I think is pretty universally considered the section that most people like, which is the Sander Cohen section.
Oh yeah, that's a fun part of that game.
Yeah. But what's interesting is if y'all know me, you know how I earn a living.
Still the same old G.
It would seem that BioShock and its sequel BioShock 2 taking place in the underwater city of Rapture would be the thing I liked the most. But playing BioShock, I'm immediately like, man, because I'm gonna play them through chronologically. I'm like, man, I can't wait to get back to BioShock Infinite and be back in Columbia.
I'm eager to replay that game one day. Not yet, but one day.
Because it's not that I dislike Rapture or anything, but man, Columbia there's something about that really echoed with me. I think obviously Rapture had to crawl so Columbia could walk, because Columbia, the entire thing of Rapture is like, you're there when the city has completely devolved and is done and is a horror landscape. Columbia is in the midst, it's at the peak of its thriving before it's about to fall. And there's something scarier to me about that. Like, you know, and I think Infinite decided to just be so brave. I mean, like, BioShock was already political. It's already talking heavily about politics in the first game.
Well, to talk about bias, you really love very pointed examinations and critiques of America. The more about it that's going to go, yeah, fuck America and fuck all this American iconography. You're going to be into it. Let's face it.
Well, it's less about that, because Rapture, the whole point of it was that they wanted to get away from America and what America was at the time, and form what they thought would be the best type of society.
Right. They thought America was too left wing. You know, they thought taxes were bad, and they wanted to run a purely capitalist, you know, Randian society. And
yeah, I mean, it's a big thing about objectivism. Yeah. And Infinite is riffing on the same thing. And eventually it becomes canon that it's like, this is, you know, all this has happened before, all this will happen again type thing.
Mm.
But Columbia being this giant, is paean the right word?
Sure.
It is this just exaltation of America is so frightening to me. There's something about that like, by putting it in the daytime and by showing it's like, no, this is a thriving, excellent, perfect utopia that is deeply steeped in American iconography and theming, made it like way more like it didn't need to rely on like, ooh, something's crawling around the corner. Ooh, little bug, I will squash you. Whatever, things the splicers are saying in your ears. It was like, it didn't really need to do that. Like walking around and seeing this was scary enough.
The execution of the horror is very different in Infinite than it is in the prior two BioShock games. And I like that variety. That's good variety.
Yeah. And I mean, to be fair, and it's an oft quoted moment from it, but it is a moment that just touched me, and I can't even say it just affected me in such a way, is when you come across that barbershop quartet singing God Only Knows. There's moments in Infinite that are so crafted to be like, and they're not all necessary. I know there's a big moment in Infinite that everybody said when I was playing it, they're like, when you get to a place where you can pick up a guitar, pick up that guitar.
And I hope you know shit about music.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't even the music part of it. It was that it is this it's touching. It's a chilling scene.
Sure.
This guitar scene. I love I also like that in Infinite, your characters are characters. You know, in the other two BioShocks, you're Gordon Freemans.
Exactly. You're nobodies, your proxies, your ciphers. Yeah.
Yeah. But I really like that Infinite decided to create very distinct characters, both as the player and as with Elizabeth.
Right. You know, with BioShock, it was about being a cipher. You know, but it was still indulging in the whole like FPS hero as cipher thing, sort of out of necessity because that's what they understood the art form to be about, like the faceless hero. But now, like Booker in Infinite is a real character who is distinctly not you.
Well, and the first BioShock is a pointed commentary about playing video games.
Yes,
I mean that and which is something that is often talked about it, and why it's one of the things that is argued as, you know, video games as art, is like, this is commentary about why are you doing these things? Why are you choosing to continue to do these things?
Right, because somebody tells you to.
Would you kindly? Which I love that. I like games that really kind of zero in on, well, why? Like, why games? And BioShock's certainly doing that. I'm interested to replay them. I'm having a good time, but already I'm just like, it's like, there is a part of me that's like, I kind of want to get through this so I can just play Infinite, which I could do, but that's just not how my weird completionist brain will work. So we'll see if when I get around to replaying through Infinite, I'll report back. But now we are going to wrap things up with our
Comment of the Week.
And this comment actually comes from Twitter, from user Kevin Hodder1. Kevin Hodder says, I'm very grateful sites like GenreVision exist where I can communicate with the kinder denizens of the internet. Now, let me tell you something. Being called one of the kinder denizens of the internet, or just a kinder space, that's worth more than gold in my book.
That makes me feel good about the kind of community we managed to foster. And I understand that we're hitting on these same notes every week, but it truly is a joy and quite a privilege to be able to have a community of folks who are tight-knit, you know, who see each other in the comment sections every week. You know, we encourage those comment sections to grow. And, you know, if you want to come to GenreVision.com and take part in the discussion there, you will not be an interloper. We welcome you with open arms, and we have lots of fun and interesting non-hostile discussions in the comments.
If you remain as respectful and as kind as our comments have remained at this point, you are more than welcome, and we hope to see you there. Well, we will be back next week to continue our Fighting Fools theme month with Street Fighter, starring Jean-Claude Van Damme and Raul Julia. Travis has not seen this. I grew up on this movie, and I've not revisited it in years, so I am very excited for next week, and I hope you will be too. So come back and join us for Street Fighter next week. As always, we want to thank you so much for listening. I'm Drew Deitch.
I'm Travis Newton.
And we'll see you next week.
Right here on GenreVision.